Hello and welcome back to the Maxine Inspector. In this segment we'll look at how we can debug the Maxine Research Virtual Machine, and in particular we'll zero in this time on how we look at the registers in the running system. In the inspector, as you can see, we have a number of windows. We've already looked at some of them. When the virtual machine is actually running, the registers viewer shows a tab for each thread. Right now we're looking at the main thread in the Java Virtual Machine. And you can see with the virtual machine stopped, a display of the contents of each register. The symbolic name for each register is generated by a scheme. Remember, we talked about schemes that plug in to parameterize the virtual machine. In this case, we have a scheme that describes the architecture of the underlying hardware. And among other things, that architectural description provides a symbolic name for the registers that we use in our display. As with other displays in the Research Virtual Machine, the inspector takes word values, in this case the contents of registers, and attempts to determine what they refer to, if anything, in memory. In some cases we'll see green, and in this case the inspector has determined that this register contains the address of a heap object. If we were to click on it, then we would bring up an object inspector as we've seen before. If it turns out that a register contains the address of a piece of executable code, so for example the instruction pointer register does just that, a click on that will actually bring up a display of the disassembled machine code. We can switch to a different thread and inspect the registers. Here is the primordial thread, which in this case is the native OS level thread that actually isn't in the virtual machine. It's simply sitting and waiting for the machine to stop. So it's running entirely native code. And you'll see, of course, then that none of the words there seem to point to anything that we know about in the heap. Okay. The flags are interpreted. Once again, there's a symbolic interpretation provided, and that interpretation, as with the register names, is provided by the description of the machine architecture. That concludes our view of the registers. In the next segment, we'll look at how we inspect the contents of the stack while we're debugging. Thanks, and we'll be back in just a minute.